How do you get ideas for writing poems? And also, we're going to be talking about writer's block. Do we think writer's block exists or not? And if it does exist, how do we avoid it? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, guys. Welcome back to Diversus Live, your weekly poetry podcast. My name is Jeff.
I'm Matthias.
And today, again, we're going to be talking about those moments where maybe you're staring at a blank page, you don't know what to do, you're terrified, you're shaking in your boots.
You put boots on specifically to shake in them. I know I have.
They're my shaking boots. They're my shaking boots.
That's the only reason why I bought them. I was at Devereaux's and
That's
they're just
true.
like, "Hey, what are you going to use these for?" I'm like, "For when I need to really inspire some fear in myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to put these bad boys on."
Yeah.
Thank you, cashier, who doesn't need to know my life.
Yeah, I usually do it with a box of Hamburger Helper. You gotta shake that as you're doing it. Don't you shake Hamburger Helper? No. I haven't had Hamburger Helper in a very long time.
That doesn't help me at all.
If you guys have had Hamburger Helper, you can let me know. Do you have to shake it at all to
Why would
mix
you have to
anything? I don't like to mix any like the seasonings, the ingredients. What the hell's in
You've
it?
never made hamburger helper?
Not in a very long time.
Did
Like,
you
it's
shake
like
it when you did?
I don't know. I'll be honest.
I'll be honest.
I didn't.
I
make
blacked
it,
out and I woke
alright,
up
alright, you
and then
want
the
this-
hamburger helper was
the
just
truth-
on
so
my
the truth comes out.
skillet.
So the truth comes out. I didn't cook with it. My mom did. She did the
Shout
work.
out to Jeff's mom.
Shout out to moms.
I
It's-
can't do
She can
it
get
live.
the mom. She gets that.
We get fancy because it's hamburger
Oh, yeah,
helper
it's like
because
super fancy.
hamburger helper is a delicacy in some countries.
Like the US.
Specifically countries like the U.S. and only.
Anyways, I know you're getting hungry talking all about all this hamburger helper
I know
and
I
things
am.
like that. So let's get into poetry. Matthias, I want you to close your eyes and I'm going to walk you through a scenario. All right. There's a blank page in front of you.
Oh,
That's about what I should have prepped you more. I'm sorry. Didn't
that's
mean to-
fine. Okay.
Jump scare. Sorry, jump scare warning.
Jump scare.
Sorry.
Okay.
How do you handle it? What do you do? Well, actually, even before we get to that, like on like a scale of 1 to 10, how long do you feel like it takes you to get started on a brand new piece if you're just kind of staring at like a blank page?
That's interesting. I think that my process, oddly enough, is it's probably started like away from the page because I think I typically when I'm engaging with poems, I'm typically start going from a place of inspiration to the page, right? So I don't think it has been very seldom that I've sat down like, okay, I just need to lock in and write me a poem. So I think I typically kind of enter in with the funnel, and it typically starts with like a line that I form a world around that line, and then it happens onto the page. So at the very least, I typically have like a line. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the first line. It just has to be like a line that I'm like, this is where like I start. But yeah, what about you? Wait, hold on. I gotta take you to the same exercise. Okay, close your eyes. Okay, now there's a ghost, and the ghost hands you a piece of paper. And he says, "Write a poem, or I'll eat all your hamburger help."
You weren't here yesterday. How did you? It doesn't bother me. I am, I am one of the people that thinks that like constraints are really helpful. I think a lot of times for artists, just like handing a blank piece of paper and be like, do something with this is like not an ideal situation. I think instead, like if you're able to provide some sort of constraints are actually very liberating. That being said, if I'm like, all right, I need to get something down, I can get something down. Now, finishing it, I may not be able to do, but I can at least. I'm not just like sitting there staring at the page for like hours. I'll get something. I'll get the start of something. I may not know what direction it wants to go in just yet, but I can usually start with something even if I don't necessarily like it. And I think, in general, my first drafts take me a very long time. So attending workshops like Kaveh, Khanum, and Kalu were really helpful because for those, yes, yeah. Actually, speaking of which, one of the fellows that I went with named Salim actually just won a $50,000 disability grant for artists, which is like, my God.
Nice.
Yeah. So shout out to Salim. But yeah, for a lot of these workshop situations,
Did I even do it? Did it do it? Yeah,
there it goes. Yeah,
there
that's
it
one.
is.
Yeah. They're having you write a poem every day, pretty much. It's just like, that's not my usual cadence for writing. So you're kind of just forced to. And sometimes you're literally, there's some late nights where you're just kind of like staring at the thing. Because it's also like, it's not just that you're writing a piece, but you're writing a piece that's going to be submitted in workshop the next day. So there's almost like kind of that, like, you don't just want to like turn in.
Extra level of pressure.
Because it's like, look, you got selected to be here. You're with other, like, you had to apply to get in. It's like, it's like, there's a certain level of quality, like, people kind of, I think, put on themselves to produce.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this, and I feel like most poets would not admit this, but do you feel like there's a level of, like, competitiveness that comes out in you when you're thinking about, okay, like, I'm writing this poem right now, and tomorrow my peers are going to be seeing the poem, and, ideally, I want to be able to come there with a poem that everybody's like, oh my gosh, this poem is melting my brain. Yeah. Like ideally, but what I definitely don't want is like for me to write the poem that everybody's like, oh, this guy stinks. Like, you know what I mean? Like, do you think there's a level of, I think, competition, or there's a competitive nature that goes into, okay, like sitting down with a piece of paper that is going to be critiqued?
I think that is there. Like, everyone, you're in the game, and you're in the game. You know what I mean? So I think everyone's operating at the same level of awareness. That being said, I think the more I go to those situations, the less I kind of care about that, because I'm much more about, you're not competing. It's not a competition. We're all running our own races, and what I need to do with my poem when I'm there is different than what other people are doing, like my first year at Kaveh, I was with Luther. Oh, what's his last name? I forget his last name. He had a book come out recently with, I think, Four Way. And he was writing poems where the speaker was in a relationship and just very jaded, and there weren't necessarily a lot of turns in the poem, and that's a common feature of pieces. A lot of times when you're looking at pieces, you're trying to identify where is the turn,
right?
But for the choices he was making with his pieces, he's like, no, like that goes against kind of what, and I'm very much oversimplifying the whole thing, but that's kind of one thing that's coming up with the work. And I think it's tricky because a lot of times we get really hung up on how other people are going to perceive our work, and this isn't it's interesting because the more I just run my own businesses, and like the more I just live, and the more I do poetry, the more I see that everything is the same. Like, the things that apply to business also apply to life, that also apply to, like, it's all operating very similar principles. Like, for one of them being this idea of fear. There's a lot of things that we're afraid of doing. We're afraid of doing them not out of our own concern, but out of concern of how it's extrinsic. It's like it's external. I mean, how other people are going to perceive us doing the thing.
Right.
So it's like, in the case of a workshop, to keep it poetry focused, I'm writing the poem a certain way because it's like, it's you see it, like, for instance, in slam, where you see it open mic, you see it lots of things. Like, I'm writing it a certain way so that it gets the feedback I want.
Okay.
Instead of producing the work that might actually push me forward.
Yeah, I think that's it, because I think it's like, because in slam, because the feedback that you want is also, I'm gonna spoil this for a lot of people. A lot of times, the reason that the poem that you hear in slam sounds like the poem that you hear in slam is because the poet that wrote the poem for the slam, right? And that's not necessarily bad. I'm not downing that. I'm just saying that I think it kind of takes like the,
Can I add to that?
yeah, go ahead.
They wrote the poem for the slam to also meet the cadence of the types of poems that are submitted for slam.
Right. So it's like, and I want to be clear, like, if that's your directionality, if that, which is just that, like, when we're talking about like the purpose of the poem, what you want for your work, what you want for the poem, and the venue that the poem is happening in, which in this case is slam. A lot of times those two things are the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have people that wrote that poem that the entire reasoning or purpose of the poem was that 8 or 9 or 10 that they got that day, that they believe they can consistently get with that. And I want to be clear, like, there's benefits of it, because there's also like the things that happen in the slam poem a lot of times in the performance of it are really can be really spectacular, right? Like, you can be watching a poem, you could be watching something that's like truly moving, that has been created and like carved up and chiseled to be exactly what the artist believes is going to render an emotion out of you, right? So that's not necessarily a bad thing, and a lot of people, I can make a clear argument that that's the point for them, right? But it's just to say that, like, a lot of times, because those two things are intertwined, it's like, again, when we're bringing it back to, if you're in a writing workshop, right, and like maybe or like maybe everybody's like, okay, sit down for this next hour, everybody separates and you're writing on this, with this form, this poem, whatever you're doing, and then when we come back, we're all going to share. A lot of times it's like, and I'm not necessarily saying that, like, everybody's poem is supposed to do this, that, and the third, like, whatever you want the poem to do. But whatever you want the poem to do, it's like, at the very minimal, it's not hurt by everybody liking your poem, right? Like, if everybody likes your poem, great. You know what I mean? Because the thing is, if everybody hated your poem, it doesn't mean that your poem is not doing what you want the poem to be doing. But it doesn't mean that it is. You know what I mean? So yeah, which is just it. I think in your example, when you're talking about, like, I understand, like, everybody has like kind of different purposes or what they're driving their work to do, and so it's like, competing with people necessarily is not the best thing to be trying to do. But, like, do you feel like trying to, because you're all there on the basis of being writers, like, everybody there is probably a better writer than it, and this is kind of also like a really weird thing to think about, and it's like something that I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but it's like you're a better writer by than most of America. Like, I want you to, like, just think about it. That's not me. I'm not. Listen, America, if you're out there listening to me, this not. But it's like, no, it's just to say that your writing skill, like, even the fact that you've gone on there, you've done something as far as standing up in front of a whole bunch of people saying a poem that, again, most humans have never done.
Right.
Right. And so it's like, you're all kind of there you're even in a much more specialized group, because it's like, likely everybody that submitted to be part of this residency is in that boat. You know what I mean? And now it's been shaved down to just y'all. And now it's shaved down to just y'all that are all in this room. And it's kind of like, if you're in the All-Star game, it's like we're all in this. And I'm not saying it's like an All-Star game, right? But I'm saying, like, you're in this All-Star game. Now, does it benefit Steph Curry to try to dunk on somebody like Anthony Towns? No. But Does he want the 3-point shot to look more skillful and amazing than in Anthony Towns' dunk? Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's just different strokes for sure, but I definitely think that like when in writing workshops that I've been in, I think that especially if I'm in them with peers that I've like kind of come up with, y'all might like, so like there's this he's a poet, he's from Dayton actually, really good dude, Trip. Like me and Trip has been in a couple different like spaces where we've been writing, like where we'd be like writing together in like groups with other people, and like whenever we're in space together, I'm like, man, like I can't let this space, I can't let everybody hear my poem and think, man, my poem is average and Chip's poem is great and this poem is great, and I gotta write something that's like,
So
I gotta do it justice.
I hear what you're saying. I get it. I've been there. But I think also, and I mean, you know, it can change in a moment. I'm not going to deny that. But in general, my approach right now, because even in those things, again, that brings up kind of like the topic of fear again, is that a lot of times when you fear something, it's like someone's like voice in your head. It's like, whose voice is it? So it's like in that sort of situation, like, oh,
That's wrong.
like I don't want the average poem. It's like, okay, well, where is this coming from? You know what I mean? Where is this fear of writing the average poem coming from? Because there's, you know, on a practical, there's people writing, however we define average, there's people writing it, and it's not the end of the world. So like, what, something caused us to have these sorts of negative associations with things, you know? But then also on the other level too is that, again, I think it can be from any perspective, but we'll use art in this case. From art perspective, that may push us to stick within our comfort zone and what feels new to us in our wheelhouse. Is like, I know how to write this sort of poem, and I know this sort of poem does well, and it's going to get this sort of reaction, and people are going to like it. Instead of targeting an area of weakness. Yeah. And being like, because if I write the poem doing things I'm weak at, well, that poem is probably not going to be, quote unquote, the best poem I've ever written. But I might be afraid, but it might push me. And so then the question is that push better than, like, is that push worth the negative perceptions that people might have of me because I'm producing, quote unquote, like lesser quality work based on people's expectations? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that's a challenge. I think this also, I want to link it back to tips for writing. Yeah, I want like tips for like writing poems. You have the blank page, and I think I don't believe in writer's block. I personally don't believe in writer's block. I think if you sit down with a piece of paper and a pen, and you sit there for 3 hours and nothing comes, fine, do the same thing tomorrow. And if it happens again, fine, do the same thing the day after that. You just keep doing it. Eventually, you're going to write something.
Wait, so I guess let's define writer's block then. How would you define writer's block?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. Is
okay. So well, how would you characterize what people are defining as writer's block?
I think people define writer's block as putting yourself in a position to create, because it probably extends beyond writing too, right? It's probably for like painting or maybe making music or something like that too. But just not like putting yourself in a position to do it, but not being able to.
Okay, I get that.
How would you define
it? I would say something similar. I think putting yourself in the position to do it is, I think it's an interesting kind of addition. Because there has to be some sort of active like desire to, right. So if somebody is like, I've had a case of writer's block for 3 years, Like, let's say they're working on something and they're like, I've had writer's block on. I've had
Okay.
writer's block for 3 years. Do you believe that?
I don't believe that.
Okay.
But go on.
I would not, could not send my own. Okay, so do you believe that the person had? So you believe that that person doesn't have writer's block?
I don't.
You just, so what I guess what would you view that as?
I view that as
Or
think
do you view that as anything? I guess.
I am of the persuasion. I forget whose concept it is, but that writer's block oftentimes is it's a fear of perfection. It's a fear of trying. Like, you're putting so much pressure on yourself to make the thing that's going to be the best work ever. You know, instead of just like, pieces don't start that way. Like, David was a block of marble for 1,000 years or whatever. You know, before Michelangelo starts carving. Like, you have to start. You know, and it doesn't start. It doesn't start by itself, and I think we've seen it with poems. You know, and you see oftentimes first drafts of poems, or sometimes even later drafts of poems, where the entry into the poem, a lot of poets keep, even though the poem isn't really revealing itself until much later. But you don't get there unless you have your vehicle in first. You know, you, in general, you don't start a poem knowing where the poem's going to go, unless you're really trying to force it somewhere, and that's probably not going to give you a very satisfying result. But in order, you have to work there, which means you have to be willing to show up and write the lines, even if you're like, I don't like this line, or I don't like it. You just kind of go, you know? So I think that instead, for the poet who's had writer's block for 3 years, I doubt, and I could be wrong, but I doubt that for every day, for 3 years, how many days is that? It's over 1,000 days. Can you imagine?
Over 1,000 days.
Every day, for 1,000 days, someone sat down to write something and couldn't. I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
I'll say this. It's never happened to me, right? But I don't know.
1,000 days? Your batting average is 0 in 1,000? I mean, anything's possible, but
I don't think I put it, but yeah, like, so it's like, but it's like 3 years. It's 3 years.
But then,
like
but then, is that even, if you're showing up? Is that still even writers? Because I guess for me, like, writing isn't just like the act of like putting the pen on the page. It's the act it's the intentionality. It's the showing up.
Yeah.
You know, you might not actually even get anything, but it's like, that's still time my mind is putting together words. It may not fit on the page, but it's not just like sitting there. You know, there's an action. So I mean, even that act of sitting down for 3 years, even if I don't get a page, is that still writer's block? I don't know.
I get that. Man, because I see that, but I think that like this the same argument could be made for like a longer period of time or a shorter period of time. So I think that that feels subjective, maybe, but I could see the truth in it though. Especially if I would like, given the like the need to actually show up, or like what showing up looks like. I think a lot of times, like, I can see writer's block in the context of like, you know, like not writing something meaningful, right? So somebody might be like, I have writer's block because I can write these silly little things, but I can't actually get something good out. I can't get out, like, I can physically write, you know what I mean? Like, I can type, or I can write something. I can physically do that. But getting out the ideas, getting out the things that like I really want to get out, maybe that's a venture that's a little harder to encroach on.
To me, that goes back to the fear discussion, though, because it's like, what's making us feel like the things that we're producing aren't of that quality that we're looking for?
Oh, I feel like like if I there's I, as far as like as many poems as I've either said or performed, it's probably like 5% of what I've written, right? So like I can write, and exactly what Jeff was talking about, like, I can write this much of a poem and then get to the 3 hours within me writing and realize, oh, the poem starts just now. Like I just got to what the poem is about, and I was able to just not crack the shell. I had to do a lot of navigating before, but I just cracked the shell on what this poem is. And like maybe that process, I could see that process taking, like, there's been poems even outside, like especially earlier in my writing, that were like that for months. You know what I mean? Where it's like, man, I can't figure out, like, I know there's something with this poem. I know there's something, and I'm writing the ideas down, and I'm thinking there's been kind of false starts where I'm like, I think I got the first answer. This is it. And then I return to it. That was actually terrible. And then I finally get to the poem, and I'm able to get to the meat of the poem. And I'm like, okay, this is the poem. And I'm like, for me, it's, it hasn't been as long as like 3 years, but I could see that process take some time. Would you consider that writer's block?
No, because I think it's still doing the work. Like, to me, writer's block isn't even doing...
You said you're not doing the work?
Yeah, honestly.
You're not doing the work
like,
if you got writer's block.
Like, I think it's just it's an excuse. It's removing agency from yourself.
Right.
I'm not writing because I have writer's block. It's like
I don't know what. I don't know what that was. But we need to clip that. Send that to you. We're not doing the work.
Garage Post Open Mic is with us.
Shout out, man.
I hope the show's going good. Let us know your thoughts on writer's block if you think writer's block exists. I don't like it. I don't like. We have control, and I think the minute that we say that. The minute that we submit that we're not doing something because of writer's block, what else aren't we doing because of other things that we feel like are beyond our control? You know what I mean?
That's... I think I understand that. Okay, I think there's things that I would say to somebody if I'm trying to inspire them. And there's like maybe things that I would say to somebody if I'm like creating like a real diagnostic for the situation. So if somebody were like, man, I can't do these 5 push-ups, and I'm like, no, like, you don't understand. You can do 5 push-ups. You can do like I push it. And they're at 3.5, and I'm like, just do it. Oh my God, just do it. And then let's say they fall out and collapse. Like, it just could be. It could be 4 is their max right now, right? It could be them pushing themselves was pushing themselves beyond 2, right? Like, and 4 is like, that's it. That's it.
I don't disagree. Right? I'm with you.
And so I think that it's like, which is just to say that I'm like, I think if somebody was asking me and was like, how do I get past writer's block? Okay, so I'll give you a good example. There was a workshop that had a open mic after it in Cincinnati before, and one of the people that was in the workshop, she was like writing a poem, and it was like, I'll say this, there's very little thing, there's a couple things that I'm like, I think they are poems, but they're not public poems, right? They're not poems that I'm ever going to share with people or work on with the. It's like it was the poem that I had to write in order to process something in my life or growing up or something like that, right? Which is just say, like, I think she was at the opening of that kind of poem, and I think she was trying to force herself to be like, this is what I have to do in front of all these people because I have to have something for the open mic, and this is what you have to do in the open mic. And I think that watching that process, and she was like, she was just she had like a lot of ideas, but she didn't really have like a formulated poem. And I'm like, what I think I think you're doing, and I told this to her on the side, but I was like, I think that you're trying to excavate your trauma in your life because you think that's what we need from you to be part of this community, right? Like you think that everybody else here, and to be clear, a lot of other people were doing that, right? They were like taking these deeply personal, almost like, hey, like, did you talk to this person about this, or did you like have these conversations, or are you still living with that? Like that's kind of, man, like I really hope people kind of feel family and feel like they're kind of, but it's also like a lot of these people are like, they're like, hey, this is my first time ever performing a poem. This is my first time ever being here. This is my first time ever seeing you guys, and this is my poem about this incredibly deeply traumatizing event that I too have not processed fully yet. I'm just going to give you the play-by-play because I need to share it with somebody, right? So it didn't really become a poem. It just became this like, and this is what I believe poems are. And I think that like she was suffering from like a degree of writer's block because to her, this was like, she's still traumatized. Like she's in a place of trauma right now. So trying to, I think a lot of times poems are attempting to be retrospective where you're like, I went through that,
Right.
but I'm like, you're going through it. So the reason why it's probably hard for you to write a retrospective on it is because you're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You're still fighting this thing. So yeah, I think that there's something to like, somebody being like, I have writer's block, but it's like a lot of times you have I think writer's block to me, because I do believe that people can have writer's block to the degree that like they could be in a mental, metaphysical even space that like blocking them from, like, there might have to be something that happens in their life, maybe a decision that you make in your mind, maybe somebody says the right words to you and that kind of changes some things for the brain chemistry, and now you're like, oh wow, I can let that go, and now, oh man, all the poems that are supposed to come from that are born from that. So yeah, I don't know. I think, man, I mean, I'm just on the other side of the spectrum there where I'm just like, yeah, I think it's possible. I think there's things that about a person that could stop them from being able to really freely express their thoughts in writing.
I don't disagree with that. But to me, even just getting something on a page, even if it's not quite what you want, isn't writer's block. I think it's, you can have that difficult poem. Lots of like big poets, like just hear interviews like Natasha Trethewey and things like that, having the piece that took you 10 years to write or something like that, But to me, that's not writer's block. That's just a difficult. Sometimes poems fight back. You know what I mean? Like, seen some things here from Garage Code. So I'm like, if I push myself to write when it's not flowing on its own, what I write always sucks. I don't disagree. Yeah. We don't control the poems. The poems are in charge. Also, if after 10, 15 minutes of trying to write, if it doesn't start flowing on its own, I just put the pen down. Yeah, that's I get like that, especially towards like the ends of poems. Like, you can't force it, and when it's not the right ending, and so sometimes it's just like, all right, today we tried, we showed up, we didn't quite get the ending, we got a lot of other stuff though, so we'll try again tomorrow. And you just kind of keep checking every day, be like, hey, ending, are you here today? No, still not today. Okay, we'll try again tomorrow. We actually were talking about that with Willie Kennard in our review a while ago. So let's kind of we discussed a bit about writer's block. Let's tie it into the central question. So if someone doesn't have ideas for writing poems, what would you recommend for them?
I try to juxtapose a person or I personify something.
I'm gonna get some water really quick.
Okay, cool. And then so I typically like juxtapose like a person or I personify something and I put them in a situation that either is abnormal to see them in or that like maybe you've seen them in but I give them like a frame of thought or a frame of mind that you typically don't really think about. A really good example of this, at least from my own personal work, is if you're in Columbus, what do we call them? A Columbi? If you're in Columbus, or if you see me perform in other states or anything like that, you know, like a good amount of my work is like, you know, around like the Bible and like the Judeo-Christian faith. And one of the things that I really recognized about my work is like I take people from scripture and I put them in scenarios that, you know, are not like, you know, why would this person be in this scenario? I actually have a Jesus poem, and well, it's not necessarily a Jesus poem. It's Jesus's younger brother Tanner, and you, you know, what's so funny about I think that poem is specific because I think it's actually a really good example of kind of a space where I thought I had writer's block, and then okay, so earlier today. I had like a cup of espresso, like I made a cup of espresso at home, right? And I drank it, but it was like this new espresso that I had not gotten before. So I drank it and I was like, it was like an hour had passed. I was like, man, this espresso's not working at all. Like I can't feel anything. And so I went out to grab coffee because I was just like, man, this espresso's not working. I need something that's gonna kick me into gear. Let me go out and grab coffee. When I went out and I grabbed the coffee, like I was at the coffee machine at Speedway and I had walked up to it and like in that instant the espresso kicked in and I could feel it, right? Like I could I was like, oh my gosh, like that's strong. And I went like Super Saiyan. But it's like I could feel it in that instant and then like I was able to come back and I was like super productive, which is just to say that like I in that moment like I was like I think I was initially I was writing a poem and I was trying to write a poem like around like an experience from Jesus and I think something in my mind kind of like I was like oh, man it's not coming to me. I was like walking around I was like walking around the apartment and I like it's not coming to me and then I think it was like I for some reason I had a random thought of the show The Middle. I don't know if you're old enough to know about this show, but the the lady from Everybody Loves Raymond had a show like after Everybody Loves Raymond ended, there was a show called The Middle. And it's not Malcolm in the Middle, but it's called The Middle and it was kind of like they were trying to essentially steal the entire motif from Malcolm in the Middle, right? Like I that's what I would say. Yeah. So it was like, and it ran like I think it I want to say it overlapped, but maybe it ran like really right after Malcolm in the Middle like was over. But essentially like that show happened, right? So in my here's what I don't know, and I have no idea. You know what? I remember because there was like it was either one of the streaming networks or something like that. Everybody Loves Raymond was like on one of the streaming networks, and in my head, I went from seeing her on the little preview screen for it, and then I was thinking about her show The Middle, and then how she was like in some interview. Again, this is a really weird long way to go about it. This is how my brain works. So in some interview, this was like a decade ago probably, she was talking about The Middle and she was like, this show is going to be like another Everybody Loves Raymond. Like I'm so excited about it. And I was thinking to myself, no, it's not. Everybody Loves Raymond was like a really amazing show. This show is not Everybody Loves Raymond. And I was like, The Middle was good. Malcolm in the Middle, that was a good show. That was about a kid being a middle child. I'm a middle child, man. What if Jesus had younger brothers? Jesus did have younger brothers. What about Jesus's younger brother Tanner? And that is legitimately the things that had to happen for the poem to happen, which is just to say that like
it's raining.
Oh, it's raining. Those are the things that had to happen for that poem to happen. It was just to say that like that's a long way of saying that like I don't think necessarily super linearly, and I'm like that's one of as far as all of my poems, that's one of my favorite poems from myself, right? Just because it was fun to write, it's fun to perform, and it's like it's on brand for me. Like I'm a middle child, and I'm a teeny tot for Christ, right? So I'm all the things that I would love to like be like expositing how hard it is to be the younger brother of the Messiah, right? So yeah, it was just to say like that was kind of my process with that, and I think that like that's typically what I do. Like my pocket is kind of being like, man, and it typically works with like funny things. You know what I mean? Because like I'm like juxtaposing two things that are like, man, what do you mean Jesus' younger brother Tanner? Jesus didn't have he didn't have a younger brother Tanner, by the way. his name was
apocryphal.
His name was yeah. Hey, go to
check out those texts. It might be
go to book 67 and you'll see some things. But no, it's just to say like I feel like that's like kind of that was like my process. I kind of pushed together two things that you don't really expect to see together, and I feel like that's where inspiration comes from for me.
That's just because that ties into I'm looking up, I'm analyzing craft essays. I'm slowly making videos about them, and one of them is this one here. So we got Madness, Rack and Honey by Mary Ruefle, if I pronounce her last name right. And I just read, there's a chapter called On Sentimentality, which is talking about just the sentimental nature of poets and things like that. But one that she quotes lots of people. One of them was Aristotle, and like one of the things that Aristotle said was, or like a defining feature of poets is a poet's ability to connect incongruous things that don't initially appear connected. And that kind of just reminds me of that. You're finding things that most people maybe wouldn't see the immediate associations before, but also drawing that immediate connection. And that's also something that we talked about too, just in terms of like a definition of metaphor, which again, I forget who said it originally, but Francine J. Harris originally introduced it to me, was that, metaphors aren't just comparing two things without like or as, they're comparing two unlike things. And I think this also kind of ties into one strategy that I would use for writing poems. I really like haiku. Newsflash, haiku don't have to be 575. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. In the latest news, haikus do not have to be 575.
Hey, Chet, I'm just now kind of coming in here. I'm looking at a poet's piece of paper, and you know what? I'm looking at it. This guy does not have 575 on it. I don't know what's going on. He is a free bird. He is a rebel, and I want to see what he got going on later on. Back to you, Dan.
He's being stoned.
Oh, finally, he is.
He's on the ground.
This is a warning to you. Do not do that, or else you're gonna end up like him.
I think turning to short forms of poetry can be helpful for getting started as well. I think this also ties in. I'm going to connect so many things together in a moment. So Garage Poets Open Mic, I'll say the best prompt, just go outside. Exercise is actually really super, super helpful. And I appreciate that point. Walking. Who was it? What poet was famous for like always taking walks? I mean, lots of poets are famous taking walks. Anyways, haiku, I think in the short form in general can be really helpful because I think sometimes some of the pressure's off because you're not like, oh, I don't need to write like an entire long poem, just 3 lines, 2 or 3 lines. I can do 2 or 3 lines. I can do that. But the way how haiku are operating is they're operating on the same fundamental principles of larger poems, in that you're trying to, one, there's an emotion you're trying to convey. 2, there's an element of surprise, which I think in general poets are trying to do. There's a push towards the unexpected, a revelation, something that's new to the speaker learns something, or the reader learns something, or the poet learns something, Yeah. Haiku are all about that. You need to have that surprise. Usually it's between the second and the third line. And then there's also the sense of trying to create a relationship between two things that normally, again, don't have a relationship. These are all
Yeah.
the fundamental concepts of poems in a lot of ways. And then the fourth thing I would add, just to kind of connect it with walks, one of the reasons why I think like walks and things like that are really helpful. It brings us back to nature. I think in general, images that are nature based tend to be the most evocative because they really draw on the senses. I mean, we are creatures of this earth. We have a connection to, well, most
Speak
of
for
us
yourself.
aside. We have a relationship with the world around us, and haiku, depending how strictly you're going with the forms and things like that, trying to tie in a nature word that indicates the seasons. Like you have like these lots of little restrictions on you, which again I think are really helpful. We talked earlier about the need for limitations versus like a blank page, and so I think haiku, short form poetry, or even just like trying to come up with a line that connects to unlike things, like just like take a random object around you, like a cell phone, and take another thing like a flower, and then be like, okay, how can I connect these two things in some way? It's like just kind of doing like little language games like that. I think can also be kind of helpful for getting the gears going and trying to get something down on the page.
A cellflower tower. That's just off the top of the head.
We'll keep working.
Okay. I think that's interesting. Kind of what you meant, what you said by that, which is also like I agree, because I think when it comes to haiku are more daunting to me than a long form poem, because I think that if it's just counting out syllables, like it's not a difficult thing to count out the syllables and just like kind of, but it's like, man, to make a good haiku, something that is meaningful, that has like you still have the same resonance of like a beginning, middle, end. You have like the climax. To have all those things and be able to do that, and you don't have, doesn't have 3 lines, right? Whatever assortment that you want. But to be able to do all that in that kind of shorter form is a little bit harder. I think for myself personally. I think what a form that I think really really helps when it comes to like kind of activating some writing, pontoons. Yeah, like those, dude. Like
especially once you're like halfway through. Once they can start.
Once you can start just bam 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 bam, you're good. Especially like, man, I typically do with the pontoon is like I write out the length that I want it to be, and then essentially if I know one, I know one's gonna be here. Two, I know two's gonna be like, I know three's gonna be here. So I just write them all in, and then like hopefully it turns out good if you do it like that. But it might not, which means that you might change some things. But also one of the things that I've done before is I've written the pontoon, and then I've just edited, like after I've written the pontoon, I'm like, okay, like let me edit lines throughout so it's no longer a pontoon, but it has some rhythmic repetition throughout, but then there's also some changes that I made in order, so it's kind of Frankensteining a poem, but I've done that as well.
I think that works. I think forms are often nice things to turn to if you're struggling with writing, you're not sure what to do for writing. Another strategy that can be helpful too is taking someone else's poem, a poem that you really like, and handwriting it. So like a poem, because there's no pressure on you, right? The poem's already written. But by going through that process of handwriting it, you're almost in a way kind of like putting yourself into that position of the poet, because you're paying so much more attention to everything. There's a lot more intentionality behind it, and you kind of put yourself in that mindset a little bit. It's not something I do often, but again, I don't typically get stuck, but if I do get stuck, sometimes that can be a way that's helpful to get out. If you want to take that to the next level, another thing you can do too is like take the poem, like put it on the wall and like just like read it, and then go to another room and try to rewrite the poem just based on memory, and just kind of seeing the parts that kind of stand out. And that can also be helpful for your own pieces as well. If you're like, I don't know what's resonating in this poem or what the pieces are. Because the big moments are going to be the ones that you capture. And all the little stuff you're probably going to lose because you're not going to remember it, you know?
Yeah.
And that can also be helpful, by the way, for getting other people to read your poem too. Like have them read the poem and then kind of like describe the poem back to you. Like in terms of what happens, because then you can see where the moments are like most resonant versus not.
Yeah. You know, something that I did, and I haven't done this in a really long time, but like that I did like years ago. It's actually, so back in my single days, like I had this like whiteboard in my apartment, and I can't really explain why I have the right whiteboard. You know, actually, you know what? It was my roommate's, and when he moved out, I just still had the whiteboard, and I was like, I'm just gonna use it. But so I had this like whiteboard, and essentially, if I was like having an issue trying to figure out what to write, I would like put like, I had like neckties, but I would like wrap them around my eyes, and like I was like, that way I had this like, sensory deprivation, like I don't have my eyesight, and I would just kind of write down like, you know, words that kind of came to me like as I was like sitting there, like okay, like maybe like, and then just like looking at like how they look like what they look like afterwards after I've written them down on the whiteboard, kind of like the grouping of words and stuff like that, and kind of seeing how things were placed here on the whiteboard kind of can bring in, like you might catch a phrase that you're like, I like that, or like you might like see like a word that you're like, that kind of makes me think about this, or the way something is grouped might make you think about it. So
I can see that.
I feel like that has helped in the past. I don't know. I mean, maybe I might want to try that again soon.
While driving, yeah. I think some of that we've done in the past is like, and I got this from Vibey Francis, is this idea of take like an adjective or a noun or something like really, really common, and then make like a grid, like a 10x5 grid or something like that. So you have like 50 cells. And then try to think of like 50 different ways to express that same thing. Okay, so again, it's less pressure because you're not trying to write a whole poem, but it's just trying to start thinking of, you're still activating, I think, a lot of the same kind of creative energies that you need for poems. So it's like, you know, like other things for like orange, fruit, sun, like, and then like just like sand, and like just keep writing all the things that kind of make you think of orange, you know, for like 50 words. And kind of seeing all the things that come from that.
Yeah.
I think another thing too, just because poetry is so emotion based, again, I'm going to go back to nature, because I think, again, the nature images draw up so many different senses, just in terms of like taste and touch and smell and things. Take a nature image and then trying to associate it with just like different emotions. It's like maybe lightning, you associate anger. Peach, maybe joy, you know, and then you can think about, why do I think of it as joy? Oh, maybe like my grandmother used to always make cobbler or something like that. You know what I mean? So like, and just kind of,
Shout out grandma.
yeah. So God bless her zombie bones.
We got.
My grandma's dead.
Oh my God.
She's literally a ghost. My grandma's literally a ghost. She turns on lights and things at my aunt's house. She gets really excited.
Did
Like,
she ever make cobbler?
Not anymore. She's dead. She's dead.
I mean,
with us.
she could turn on lights. She could kick on another.
Turn on lights.
Maybe you just gotta put all the ingredients. Maybe she can't go to the store.
Grandma,
Maybe
don't
put all
turn
the
the oven
ingredients.
on. Please don't turn. We have nothing in the oven, Grandma. We're gonna burn down my aunt's house. Don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, not in the oven right now. It just hasn't made the cobbler.
It's wild. Like she's called the house before, like on her old landline that like was like disconnected and stuff like that. She's a zombie. Grandma's creepy. I love Grandma. She's creepy.
Well, okay, so she's not a zombie. She's like a ghost.
Yeah. Yeah, but the line is "God bless her zombie bones." It's not
God, that is
God bless
true.
your
God
ghost
bless
bones.
your
Doesn't have the
zombie
same-
bones.
doesn't have the same
Although
meaning.
I feel like if it's like if God blessed her zombie bones, she wouldn't be a ghost.
I mean, we don't know that. We're assuming.
Fair enough. well played.
Anyways,
Like, where are you getting that science from? Like, you know what? You're right.
Let's wrap it up in a bit. But other quick ideas for if people are trying to get ideas for writing poems. What else can I do? I'm turning to other art forms can be helpul.
Yeah.
So that's what I do, but like, drawing or painting, looking at painting, take a walk to the art museum.
You know what? We might do math. I've always felt like math was like the antithesis, not antithesis, but it's like it's far enough away from I think what my brain does to write that like any kind of issue or blockage that I had in my writing is kind of disrupted by this other function. And so now like I do math for 10, 15 minutes and then maybe I take a little walk and when I come back like I have like somewhat of a fresh perspective or something like that. So I don't know. Actually, I was helping my niece with her math homework earlier today. So
and we wrote a poem together apparently.
We wrote a poem. And that was and then we ate a cobbler that was made by a living person and not.
Wow! Shots fired! Shots fired!
We don't know if it might have been a better cobbler.
Shots fired
she's a ghost.
At my grandmother.
Well, she's a ghost, so they're gonna go right through.
I really don't appreciate.
Unless we have like the Ghostbusters, and even then, they were not.
We're not sucking my grandmother up in a vacuum today.
Not yet. It has not progressed that much yet.
Other things to try too. Maybe do like a voice recording. So like instead of writing a poem, maybe just like trying to like talk through a poem. Could be just change the medium. I'm just throwing some stuff out there. That might be something that helps you out. Especially like if your poem's more oral based, like if you're planning on like performing on a stage. Maybe you don't even need to write your poem at all. You just need to speak your poem.
Might be kind of dangerous, but go for it.
Try it out. I did want to see some people on Threads post a question in the Threads. Just a couple quick responses. This one to highlight. That's a nice name. And if you think of things in the future and you're watching us from the past, you could also put them into the comments to try to help other people out.
I want to see them.
Some suggestions. We got Leaves on a Breeze just saying, stepping away for a while, creating some distance. It's okay to take breaks. I don't have an issue with that. If that doesn't help, try another hobby for a while. Again, putting your mind into a different space. One that you find fun. If you're not having fun, stop doing it. Some big words of wisdom there. And then Seventh Facade says, I like to do writing sprints when I'm feeling blocked. I'll find a prompt or something to get focused on. Again, prompts. And restrictions, give myself 15 minutes to just get as many words down about it as I can without thinking about it too much. I think like that time aspect is really helpful because some days just aren't going to happen. Some days you're writing and it's just not going to work out. And that's okay. But being like, I'm going to show up for 15 minutes today and then whatever happens, happens. That's one of the reasons too. I think a lot of social media is because you're not just seeing posts, right? You see like other writers as well. There's a lot of times like talk on like word counts and things like that. And I guess personally, I'm not as big a fan of like tracking words. I'm much more interested in like the time aspect. Be like, So instead of being like, oh, I wrote 100 words today, be like, oh, I sat down to write for 10 minutes today. Like I'd rather, I have much more control over the time than I do the words.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's like it kind of creates a rhythm. I think we talk about this a lot, especially for people that are beginning. If they're like, I really want to write, like, because it's really the same thing. Even when we're talking about like basketball, right? So like basketball is like a really good example because like we have like our greats in the field of basketball are people that were like unholily they're devoted to it on an unholy level, but it also created greatness, right? And they would like Kobe has like these, people have these stories about Kobe, but Kobe would always talk about, just he's always in the gym, he's always putting up shots. And the thing is that if you know anything about Kobe Bryant, you know that like at some point it was like, okay, you're one of the best players to ever play the game. And you know how to shoot a basketball. As a matter of fact, at this time in your life, you've shot a basketball enough to where like you just know what to do. But it's like if you're not consistently in the rhythm of shooting the basketball, like it can get to a point where it's like you kind of lost the touch for it. But if the only time I ever picked up a basketball was when on these super high performing moments where I'm like I need to be at the top of my game, then like I'm not going to be able to do unconsciously, like I'm not gonna like almost like unconsciously, like right, like my subconscious is not gonna be able to generate the results that I would want it to be able to do in my conscious mind. And so it's like if you've written a poem, then you're a poet, right? Let's say that if you've written a poem, you're a poet. But like if you want to be consistent with writing the poems, then exactly what you said, like you have to consistently put the shots up, because eventually you'll get to a point where it's like it's just gonna feel like the thing that you do is write poems, because it's like I always just write poems, and so it's not gonna just be you get to this writing workshop and now everybody's sitting around the table, now everybody's like it's like that. This is not separate from what I always am doing, because I'm always doing this. Now I'm just doing it here.
Garage Poets mentioning poem. Matt Wall has great exercise. We're having a hard time. I think 20 words. And write them without thinking about too much. Yeah, don't over edit. I think it's really big. I think that's one of that gets back to the fear of like perfection and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts on how to get ideas for writing poems?
Not really. I think we've covered all the ones that I had ideas for.
And then adding that those 20 words then become titles for 20 different poems, a chapbook of poems.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. All right, guys, like I mentioned earlier, if you have your own suggestions that you would like us to share with others who are curious about what are some ideas for writing poems, feel free to share them. We'd also love to know your own opinions on writer's block. Do you think writer's block exists? Are you suffering from it? Are you suffering from writer's block? Let us know. And we'll catch you next week with another episode of Diversus Live. Once more, my name is Jeff.
I'm Matthias.
We will see you guys later. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good.
Hold up. We didn't even talk about the stuff coming up this week.
This week there's things. Yeah,
there's things. We gotta tell you about the things.
So. In Garage Poets Open Mic, by the way, please check the chat and replay. They're going through more steps. This is a very involved process. So think of 20 words. Write them without thinking about much. Those 20 words are the titles for 20 poems. Write the 20 poems. I'll be spending 10 minutes on each poem. I would have a hard time with that.
That would be a little arduous for me too.
Yeah. Now you have a chapbook. You have a 200 minutes chapbook. This week, things we got going on. Is there anything? I don't think there's anything crazy going on. Though there are some things coming up April and May. This week we have on Wednesday, tomorrow night, we'll have our webinar. So if you're interested in trying to turn your writing into a course, feel free to find out more information at diversuspoetry.com, where you can register for that. It's 9 p.m. New York. It takes about 30 minutes. On Thursday, we're doing our Photo Thursday. So we'll be at a downtown location in Columbus. And if you want a new professional author, writing, artist photo, we can get that done for you. Get one photo for free. Friday, we have our open mic at Throwaway Cafe right around 7:30 p.m. on the west side of Columbus. And just some things to keep an eye out on. In April, we are partnering with the Southeast branch of Columbus for library. For an open mic and then also a workshop. So we're going to do a workshop, interesting enough, on starting a poem, like how to start a new poem and some strategies.
Look at us.
Like that. Yeah, so getting on that. In addition to that, in April, we'll be hosting our poetry retreat. And then in May, a couple other things will be coming up, which we'll be discussing as we get a little bit closer. I think that's everything.
I think that is everything.
Okay. All right.
We did it.
We're going to leave now. All right. You guys have a good day. Thank you to Garage Poets Open Mic hanging out with us for a bit. We'll see you all later. Have a good day. Have a good night and a good afternoon.